Welcome back to Questing Beast, I'm Ben. Today we're going to be taking a look at an RPG that my patrons have requested, Mork Borg, which is a very doom metal RPG in the OSR style, or with the OSR mindset. It was put out by Pelle Nilsson, and graphic design and art by Johan Nohr and Dead People. This book recently won 4 different Gold ENnie Awards, including Best Game, Product of the Year, Best Writing, and Best Layout and Design. So this book has a lot to live up to. Before we get started though, quick shout out to some of my new patrons, including Brian Erickson, Warren L. Denning, Andrew Barnes, Colin Cloaker, J.S. Major, and Glenn Seal. Thank you so much for helping to support the channel. And if you would like to join the ranks of these fine people, there are links down in the description below. So let's take a look at what we get inside of Mork Borg. And no, I am not going to try and pronounce the umlaut. I think I would just sound kind of ridiculous if I did that. So we have the end papers being used here to give you important information. That's the front and the back as well, which is always really great. This book has a very over-the-top doom metal feel to it. You're living in this dying world that's destined for destruction, trying to survive for as long as possible. It's very over-the-top. I find it to be a little bit silly, not necessarily in a bad way. You can tell that the authors are very much in on the joke at how ridiculous and over the top they are making everything. One of the main standouts is the graphic design, as we will see going through it. This book was originally written in Swedish, and the English writing and creative consultation was done by Patrick Stewart of Veins in the Earth fame. At the beginning of the book, we get some pieces of setting. So we start off with this paragraph: the wind from the west, from the sundered land. Rot rides it, and the stench of blood. Cursed walker, will you travel there? To the valley of the unfortunate undead? Our young ones are taken by the child thief Tergal, known for his vile crimes and alchemy of flesh. So you get a sense of the tone that they're going for here. We have a variety of different bits of world building. We have a lot of times these giant fonts are splashed across the page, making things really jump out. There's a lot of vibrant colors, a lot of yellows, a lot of pinks and things like that. A huge number of fonts. The book really comes across almost as an art book or a design book more than a role-playing game in many cases. A variety of different villains, different places. Galgenbeck, for example, in the land of Tveland, I know I'm mispronouncing that, I apologize, is the greatest city that ever was. We also have Sarkash, which is a forest. The Palace of the Shadow King. The Grift. And so on and so forth. There isn't a whole lot of information for a lot of these. A lot of times you get, a paragraph or two. So it's really there to jog your imagination, I suppose. Often not really a lot to run an entire game there, at least right out of the book. The Western Kingdom, the Valley of the Unfortunate Undead. The whole book is put out with a ridiculously high attention to quality. So extremely well bound. This thing is solid as a brick. It's not going anywhere. It has a yellow ribbon here. All of the pages are glossy. It feels like an expensive magazine, but tougher and more long-lasting. We have this calendar here, so this is a very doom-laden land, and these are all different dooms that can befall you. So depending on how long your campaign is going to go, you can roll a D100, 20, 10, 6, or 2, depending on the length of your campaign. And whenever you roll a 1, then it activates one of these dooms, which are all written as if they're part of a scripture, which is very flavorful. For example, things like the tree shall wither, shrivel, and die. Or perhaps, and the last king and the last queen shall wither to dust. Their wretched courts are devoured by wolves. So as things go on, the land becomes more and more doomed. Start getting into weapons here. And we start seeing that the way that the layout is really done for effect and for drama, I suppose, more than really for communicating information. For example, the fact that a femur does D4 damage takes up an entire page. Whether that really bothers you or not is, I suppose, up to you. You can tell that the authors, though, are really leaning into this. They're not trying to maximize space. They're trying to create a visual impact, and I think they're very successful at that. We have a system for armor. Armor is ablative, so it just reduces damage. You roll a die to see how much damage is reduced every time that you are hit. We have a list of equipment here. And then we start getting into the rules over here with our abilities. There's 4 different abilities here: agility, presence, strength, and toughness. You roll 3d6 to generate them, and that gives you a score. But all you're ever really going to need in this system is the score, from -3 to +3. Although I believe as you can improve your character, it can go above +3. I think up to +6 is the maximum. Tests are very simple, very similar to what you would see in something like 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, where you are simply rolling a d20, you're adding your bonus, and then you're trying to hit a difficulty rating from 6 through 18. The rules themselves are simple enough that you can just memorize them and go right away. Hit points is toughness plus a d8. We do have some situations throughout the book where the emphasis on cool-looking graphic design can get in the way of communicating information. For example, this area down here, it took me a little while to realize that this was, in fact, a rule. At 0 hit points, you are broken. At negative hit points, you're dead. Makes sense, but it just wasn't written as a rule, so I didn't process it that way immediately. I like the way that there's these little arrows here pointing to rules that are related. I think that's kind of cool, actually. We have how to do violence. Melee is done with a strength test against a difficulty rating of 12. Range is a presence test, and defense is an agility test. All rolls in this game are player-facing, so the DM never has to roll anything. Whenever a monster attacks you, you can roll your defense. Whenever you attacked, you can roll your melee or your ranged. And then, of course, you can roll your armor die to see if damage is reduced. There's rules here for critical hits and for bad things that can happen to you if you get broken by violence. We have a reaction roll, similar to what you see in classic D&D. We have morale rules, important for enemies so that you don't have to kill everything off. Things might run away or surrender. Rules for improving your character over time. What you do is you roll 6d10, which is unusual, and if the result is equal to or greater than your current maximum HP, you increase it by d6. You can also roll a d6 against every ability. Results equal to or greater than the ability, increase it by 1 to a maximum of +6. You got some powers here. There's not that many compared to a lot of other RPGs, though I suppose you could add your own or make them up. And they tend to be written in scrolls collected by the characters. We have a variety of... I'm not totally sure what this table is for, which is an issue I've run into more than once, where it's just, I'm not sure what this table is. It's not labeled all that well. So these are the Basilisk demand. Perhaps this is a list of things that a Basilisk is asking you to get for them, although why it is in this part of the book is a little bit unclear. Things can be a bit jumbled. We have omens here that your character can have at birth, and some horrible negative traits that they might have to give them a little bit more variety. There's all sorts of flavorful little things like roll a d20 or throw a knife at the page to the right. If you want to find out more terrible backstory about your character. All of the fonts are very cool looking, but they're not always easy to read. It took me a minute or two to kind of decode what was going on here. So this is Arcane Catastrophes. That can happen if your magic goes wrong. We have some optional classes here, 6 of them, that you can add to make your character a little bit more flavorful, including the Fanged Deserter, the Gutterborn Scum, the Esoteric Hermit, the Wretched Royalty, the Heretical Priest, the Occult Herbmaster, I should say. We have a small bestiary here, including Seth the Goblin. We have a Berserker, we have a Wraith, a Blood-Drenched Skeleton, an Undead Necromancer. We have a Troll, a Zombie, an Undead Doll, a grotesque gargoyle of some sort, a Wicked Knife Wielder, a Wyvern, And that's about it for our monsters. What we have here, again, it took me a while to read because I thought this was a C, so I kept reading it as cut cased, but it's an outcast, and I just had a hard time reading it. A lot of the design work, while looking cool, is not the most effective for comprehension. So some weird outcast followers that you can acquire for your team. Now, the interesting twist is that once we get to the back of the book, we do get a built-in adventure. And the funny contrast with the front of the book is that the layout and the design of this is much better in the sense of being easy to use and practical during play. As before, it looks really good. Like the artwork here all looks good, but it's not as easy to comprehend on the fly, whereas the dungeon is really top-notch. I'll show you an example of what I mean here. So we start off with a top-down layout of the dungeon as a whole. Everything is labeled with numbers, and then right over here we have what that room is, including if there is some sort of monster there or NPC that's also labeled. So it gives you a lot of information in an overview right at the beginning. Once we get into the actual description going room by room, what we find is that on every page, we always have a replica of the whole dungeon, which is really great. You always see exactly where you are because your room is shaded in. So you know where your exits are, you know what the rooms around you are like. You're always in context. When we get to the description of each room, we always start with initial impressions. These are mostly sensory stuff. Cool, slightly smoky air, or perhaps rotten stench, hot, sad violin music from the staircase. So you can immediately tell your players what they're encountering, what things feel like. We have all of the important things are done in bullet points, with bolded words for the most important stuff, and then some slightly less important stuff that's not bolded. We have some important things that can happen. For example, steal the flowers or a book, something happens. Study the books more closely, roll a d4, something happens. If there's something that applies to the whole room, like the guards in room 4 hear any noise made here, it's put in bold at the bottom. If there's any monsters or creatures in the room, they are always put in one of these side margins with all of the stats that you need to run them and any additional information. It's great. It's always very fast to find what you're looking for. It's extremely well laid out. You can scan it and get the information quick. It's wonderful. I wish a lot more books did this and had this much attention to detail when it comes to layout. The overall layout of the dungeon is also quite nice in the sense that there is plenty of loops. There's lots of different ways that you can go. It's very non-linear. There are secret passages that connect up the map in ways that you don't expect. So there are lots of opportunities for exploration. There's a number of different NPCs in here that have their own desires. So there's kind of mini factions that are in conflict with each other that you can perhaps turn to your advantage. Lots of good stuff all packed into a very small space, along with some very evocative imagery. It's called the Black Sludge. Wrought Black Sludge is the name of the adventure. And there's one room right up here that's all covered in this black sludge with this giant column in the middle with two skeletons at the top playing a violin, which is just a great image. Well, the bottom is covered in this horrible black sludge with this giant centipede worm-like thing crawling around inside that can devour you instantly if you're not careful. A few more random tables at the back of the book, and then we have our information on the back cover and in the end papers. What I like here is that this is a summary of most of the rules that you would need. So you have your abilities and tests, how to do adventuring, how powers and scrolls work, combat. So the somewhat confusing layout of the earlier parts of the book is mostly rectified here in terms of understanding the rules. So that's it for my review of Mork Borg. It is a real standout in terms of design in the OSR. It's a beautiful looking book, put out with ridiculously high attention to detail and very high production qualities. The main selling point, I think, is the graphic design, and it's really going to be up to you whether that's your thing, because there are definite downsides to it. The world and lore is very doomy, it's very over the top, it's kind of funny in places, but there isn't a whole lot of detailed setting information, so you would have to make a lot of that up on your own. However, if these people put out more dungeons and adventures like the one in the back of the book, I would really like that a lot because it's so well designed and laid out that that is extraordinarily easy to use. As always, I'll put a link down in the description below if this is the sort of thing that you are interested in. And thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time.